Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm glad you could join us for this webinar on Introduction to the Nigerian Electricity Industry Value Chain. We're confident that through this webinar, you'll get a better understanding of the entire electricity industry value chain. Most people are familiar with the distribution companies because they are customer interfacing. The other key players in the industry include generation and transmission. And we'll be discussing the roles of each subsector in the value chain and how they interconnect. And you'll also a framework that underpins the entire industry. My name is Afolabi Davidson of Energy Training Center and will be your moderator for this webinar. So first, let's go over a few housekeeping of today's webinar will be available after the live discussions, which you can access. Our panelists a question. You can type your question by using the Q&A icon available to you at the bottom of your screen. And we also encourage you to share your key light bulb moments that you get during the webinar on your social media and Power Webinar. That's one word, ETC Power Webinar. And for those of you just joining us, welcome. It is my pleasure to introduce to you our guest panelists in no particular order. First, we have Onyinye Nzelu, who is an energy market consultant at Energy Markets and Regulatory Consultants in Abuja. And then we have Seyi Sobogun. Seyi is a commercial consultant for Egbin Power PLC. Egbin is the largest power plant in West Africa. And we have Onu Omar-Ikaige, who is a business consultant providing services to the discos. And last but not least, we have Afolabi Ojosu, who is a legal and regulatory consultant for I. He's also a former employee of NERC, NERC. Now, to start off the discussions, I will ask Afolabi Ojosu to lead off by sharing his thoughts on the regulatory framework and all the legal issues underpinning the power industry. So Afolabi will take us through legal and regulatory aspects of the power industry. So Afolabi, are you ready?
Yes, David, I'm ready. Good. My name is Afolabi Ojosu. I'm a regulatory consultant, and I'll be telling you about the legal and regulatory framework for the power sector, as the policies, the tariff that are applicable in the industry. I'm going to start from law and policy. How did we get from the privatization process to where we are today, all right? And the role of government in the power sector. Basically, the Nigerian government provides overall direction for the electricity market and ensures that there's general consistency of electricity policy across the nation, all right? By enacting or promulgating various laws and policy, the federal government makes sure that at all times, the electricity policy or the yearnings of the country as regards to such policy are in line with the objectives of government. All right, the next slide. Now, in the next slide, we're able to see a few electricity policies that the federal government has put in place over the years. We have the National Energy Master Plan, which was put in place in 2007, the Electricity Master Plan in 2008, the Rural Electrification Policy Paper that directs that every local government area is connected to the national grid, the roadmap for the power sector in 2010, that ultimately was what led to the privatization of the sector, the Vision 2020. Yes, very, very important because we are also in 2020. And the National Rural Electrification Strategy and Plan, amongst others. Now, these policies together from the trust of the federal government's aims and aspirations with regards to electricity in Nigeria, whether on-grid electricity, off-grid electricity, urban or rural electricity. Afolabi, the next. So the regulators of the Nigerian electricity supply industry. First, you have NERC, the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission. NERC is the sector regulation, regulating distribution, transmission, and the generation aspects of the sector as it relates to electricity. NERC makes all the regulations and enforces the provisions of these regulations where any industry member has. Secondly, you have NBET. NBET is the cash collector for the industry. So the Nigerian bulk electricity trader buys power from the generation companies and sells it to the distribution companies and acts as a settlement system between both the distribution companies, the transmission companies, and the generation companies. Basically, use energy from all discos. As you can see, one of the discos is there, is KG Electric. So all payments for energy goes to MBET. The transmission company was responsible for transmitting electricity from the generation companies to the distribution companies. So the TCN gets payment for the services it renders through ONEM. That's the operator of the Nigerian electricity market, or simply called the market operator. ONEM administers the electricity market. So the entire administration for the electricity market, the day-ahead nominations, the quantum of power that is distributed for each distribution company goes from the market operator. And then not to be left out, the key players we have in the industry, one of the very key players, the central bank, in something we call the Nigerian Electricity Market Stabilization Fund, NERC. And by this funding mechanism, the CPN became a key player in the industry, having a lot of transactions for the distribution sector, and then putting in place some incentives for the generation sector. All right, so NEMCO, on the other hand, the Nigerian Electricity Liability Management Company, is the company that took over all the liabilities of all the successor companies and the discos that were sold during the privatization process. Now, during the privatization process, unlike what you have where assets and liabilities are sold to companies, what was sold are the assets, and then NEMCO took up that liability on behalf of the federal government of Nigeria. Then next in line is the BPE, the Bureau for Public Enterprises, who represents the federal government interest on the board of all privatized entities. And then you have the NIPP, the successor privatized GENCOs, the private IPP GENCOs, who are all generation companies that are come out of the privatization process, and they inject power into the grid. So, Afolabi, let's move to the next slide. So, how does NERC perform its function as a regulator? NERC has 7 functions. The chairman has a tenure of 5 years. Every other commissioner has a tenure of 4 years. NERC is responsible for creating an efficient industry through regulation, through putting in place market structure, and making sure that distribution companies, generation companies optimally utilize the electricity resources available to them in order to be able to achieve a maximum rate of return on the assets that they have put into the field, and in order to ensure that the electricity companies operate efficiently. Of determining price. Price in the Nigerian electricity industry is regulated by the multi-year tariff order, the MITO, which NERC issues from time to time. The next slide we'll be talking about MITO and the building blocks for the tariff. All right. So now, what is the tariff? World over, we've always heard everybody saying, oh, the disco tariffs in Nigeria are not cost reflective. There's something wrong with the tariff. Nigeria has non-cost reflective tariff. Well, what is the tariff? That is done by NERC, all right, for consumers to buy electricity. So the tariff can either be this generation tariffs, all right? So what are the basic principles of this tariff? The first basic principle is cost recovery and the financial viability of regulated entities. Now, a tariff, when it is being built, allows regulated entities to recover costs for their investments, reasonable rate of return on the capitals they've invested. Now, this rate of return is guided by NERC and is as determined by NERC. So electricity companies cannot at any point make more money than has been allowed by NERC, which is allowed and built into the tariff. Now, furthermore, tariff signals the indices for investment, where the tariff is cost reflective, and then there's capital going into the sector, and the rate of return on those investments are being the tariff triggers and signals such things. And furthermore, it provides for certainty within the entire country. So the price of electricity in Lagos would not so much be fundamentally different from the price of electricity. So 1 or 2 naira, all right, differentiating the tariffs based on fiscal efficiency cost. The cost is still regulated. So let's move to the next slide. All right, so now what are the inputs to this tariff? All right, so first is the forecast of load, the capacity of the system, the fuel cost in the case of the generation company, the level of losses that is encountered in the system, the number of customers. So the number of more industrial customers than residential customers, the operations and maintenance cost in the system. These are the various building blocks that goes into the MITO tariff as we have it today, and then form the final tariff to consumers. The last iteration of the tariff was meant to go live on the 1st of April 2020, but that has been cancelled due to the current economic situation we have in the country. So what are the factors and the cost of power? We have the load and the demand. So where the demand is very, very, very low, all right, the tariff is going to go up. Where you have more demand, the tariff is going to go down based on the levelized load that you have, all right? The depreciation and the capital recovery of the assets that have been deployed into the network. Inflation also affects tariff. Exchange rate. In the power sector in the last week, technical devaluation of naira by the CBN from 360 naira to 380 naira. Now, because there was a technical devaluation, you're going to be seeing tariffs go up about 1.5% in low cost due to the 20 naira differentiation that you have on the naira. So the effect of the CBN action is going to actually push up tariffs based on the fact that the exchange rate is now diverging from the point of convergence cost. Also, tax cost. The recent tax that came in changing from 5% to 7%. What is that tariff and what is this reflective tariff? What we have currently is a tariff that aims at cost reflectivity to take into account the cost of investment of the discos in the network, all right? And trying to make sure that the discos are able to recover that cost of investment as well as the marginal rate of return as profit on that investment. But now, where we're moving to, which is the service reflective tariff, is the tariff that aims at paying the discos for the level of service that has been carried out or that has been delivered to their customers. So where the DISCO has provided, for instance, 20 to 24 hours of power per day, the tariffs will be higher than areas that get 6 hours or 8 hours of power per day. Because for you to be able to provide 20 to 24 hours of it's going to go, it takes a whole lot of finance. And the regulators are now looking at franchising, sub-franchising, and looking at how the service reflective tariff regime would work. I'm sure when we come to the main class, we'll be better able to explain the DISCOs that are currently ahead of the curve in putting in place service reflective tariff and those that are still on the cost reflective tariff. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much, Afolabi. That was a very interesting presentation. You mentioned the issue of service reflective tariff, which is a new term that many of us are actually just learning. There are several questions already. I'd like to mention to our participants that your questions will be treated during the session. We have the next presenter available and waiting to talk to us on the generation aspect of the power industry chain. Please welcome Seyi Sobogun, who is a commercial consultant at Egbin Power PLC. Seyi, why don't you say
hello? Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone can hear me. My name is Seyi Sobogun. Like has been said, I'm a commercial consultant and in one of the, in fact, the biggest generation company in Nigeria. In Egbin, I've been in the sector since privatization. Before the slides come up, it's important to draw some thoughts from the earlier slides. And one of the thoughts there is about load and demand. I'm always an advocate and I always preach on people understanding the importance of utilization of power as a reflection of the cost. And we do not use what is a few that have used the power, paying for a power that a lot more people can use. So that's what all right, so in talking about generation, feeding from the previous slides, you would notice that generation is a cost to distribution and by implication a cost to the consumer. Okay, generation cost is probably, or if not, the biggest cost of power to the consumer. All right, and if you look at the slide in front of us, you will notice that we have a power mix here. We have about 80% of the power in Nigeria driven by gas, that is natural gas. Okay, because of that, our focus for this generation discussion will be around gas, utilization of gas, and how this plays out in the industry and the value chain as the case may be. Next slide. And rightfully so, that Nigeria decided to depend on gas-fired power generation because we are the largest, we have the largest reserves of gas in Africa, and we're the 9th largest producer of gas in the world. So it's understandable that we want to rely on gas a lot because we have the resource and we should do just that and transform our country for industrialization. But it's important for us to note that 60% of the cost of generation is gas, meaning that the average Nigerian pays more for gas than every other service that is added to the electricity that we have in our houses. In fact, just about 30% is on operations and maintenance. So gas. So doing a simple maths, then you have 80% of the power that we have in Nigeria from gas. It's about 30% of the money that you pay that goes into gas, cost reflective tariff that you pay goes into gas. I mentioned that importantly because there are some levels of pricing and what I call pricing regulation that makes it that the average Nigerian doesn't pay the full cost of every aspect of the value chain. That will be addressed in the open class as we talk some more. So if you look at what has been mentioned before in terms of gaps of the tariff, cost reflective, service reflective, all the nomenclatures we have around tariff, there seems to be some level of gap. If there is a gap there, why would commercially minded gas operator put gas into power when there is a gap in terms of investment, in terms of pricing, and or cost recovery? The next slide answers that question. And that we call the domestic supply obligation. Why did the government do that? They intend to start industrialization to overcome the inertia. If you don't have the right cost at the tail end, yes, you'd have to start from some place. So the government mandated operators to dedicate a portion of their production to the domestic market. Power is one of the major beneficiaries of the DSO, okay? And that's the reason why you see we have a lot more gas-fired power plants than we used to have back in previous years. And that is because now we have available gas, not just in terms of paying for it, but actually dedicated for power generation in the country. But the fact that we have the gas doesn't mean that it should be wasted. So the question now becomes, how do we utilize what is available, limited and not necessarily cheap? How do we get the best out of it? And that is what we'll be talking about in the next slide, which is more or less what I call like the triangle of generation, getting the most out of generation or driving the cost of generation down. If gas is a major cost, okay, it means that we need to get the most out of it. One of the key aspects of generation is efficiency. What does that simply tell us? Getting the most output out of a limited input being your resource. Imagine you had 10 bulbs and you wanted to give those 10 bulbs power, and you had just 1 liter of gas, and that 1 liter of gas can produce power for 10 bulbs. If for one reason or another your processes are not efficient or not disciplined enough, you might end up with a situation whereby you can only produce power for 5. And because of the nature of cost or cost recovery, as the case may be, 5 bulbs will have to pay for that 1 liter of gas. It's more expensive for them, probably 100% more expensive to maintenance. How do you achieve efficiency without maintenance? The right maintenance at the right time gets the most out of your equipment. If equipment are not able to give you power for 10 bulbs and is only able to give you power for 5 bulbs, what you end up is the same scenario. The output is paid for by 5 instead of by 10. But it doesn't stop there, because even if you can't produce output is only paid for by the same 5, hence utilization, which I call use and maximization. Another scenario that we might relate to, imagine you have an apartment building of 10 flats and 1 generator of 100 kVA for simplicity's sake, and only 2 tenants occupy that generator, and there's a minimum amount of diesel needed to run that generator. It's only simple that those 2 would bear the cost of 10 possible flats, but they pay more at that point in time. Imagine if 10 of all 10 were contributing to that pool. What happens is that the cost of diesel for that house becomes lower per flat. Hence why utilization becomes, the more participants we have in the sector, the cheaper, and ultimately the cheaper the unit cost of power becomes for everybody. Next slide. So in addressing that, one of the key challenges, which I call the starting point of the solution or the fueling of the sector, is liquidity. Liquidity stems from tariff, service reflective, or cost reflective, as the case may be. With liquidity, you can attract investments into the gas itself. which is the major driver in Nigeria for power today. If you pay for the gas, or you're able to fund the gas investment, there will be more than enough gas to fuel our development. The next one is investment or attraction of investment for distribution part of things. That also means that transmission will get the benefits of this cash flow and this investment. And if you have a stable grid, it is inevitable that you have more participants in the grid, and you would have more industries relying on the grid, and you have less, embedded or many generators all around. And that will complete the cycle in terms of cash flow going into the system again. And industrialization is inevitable from there. So at this point, and in summary, I would say that generation and or the value chain of power, and as we will see as we go along in the class, it is a joint venture. Everybody participates in it, and I believe that if we're able to do that, everything just kind of works for everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Seyi. You've helped us understand that there is a connection between what happens in one aspect of the value chain to the next, and that has a ripple effect to all of the different sectors in the value chain. We appreciate that. And I'm sure a lot of our listeners would be thinking of questions that they would want to ask. I certainly have some questions that I would love to ask, but I would leave that to our listeners. But that brings us to the next presenter, who is going to talk to us about the transmission aspect of the value chain. And our guest panelist for that is Onyinye Nzelu, who is a consultant with energy markets and regulatory consultants. And Onyinye, please say hello to our participants while I get your slides up.
Good afternoon, everyone. As introduced, my name is Onyinye, and my pleasure to be here. I'm happy to be here. I also want to say a big thank you to Afolabi and Seyi on the work they have done as they spoke to policy and generation respectively. For this segment, I will further the conversations by speaking through electric power transmission, its importance, and the structure of the transmission company of Nigeria and how it works in Nigeria today. Afolabi, thank you much for putting up my slide.
Okay.
So in the traditional power delivery structure, which is what we have in Nigeria, where everything is centralized, we operate a centralized grid in Nigeria. Generating stations are typically sited far away from points of energy consumption. So as you can see in the diagram up on your screen, transmission networks then become the critical link that connects generating stations like Egbin that Seyi just spoke about to distribution companies, and then distribution companies ultimately give power to consumers. So it's similar to the way that farms are located away from urban centers. So typically you have a large farm that say produces yam, it's typically not in the middle of the center, and you have a big lorry transport that food produce to the urban centers for consumption. So transmission networks evacuate from generating stations located across the different states of the country and control the flow of this power to the districts to further distribute to their users. Now today we have about 28 pre-connected generating stations all across the country, and then you have 11 distribution companies. So the transmission network and transmission company of Nigeria is a critical link between these unbundled generating stations and the unbundled distribution stations. At unbundling, during privatization, transmission remains, it's 100% ownership was still given to the federal government, so it is run and operated by the federal government. Now, for efficient evacuation of of power through transmission networks is typically operated at high voltage. There's a lot of focus on that, but just know that for it to be efficient, for evacuation of bulk power to be efficient, it has to be done at very high voltage. So we're speaking of about thousands of voltages. So those large icons you see on the expressway while you travel, those are yeah. So speaking to the transmission company of Nigeria today now, so they have three major departments. We have the transmission service provider, we have the market operator, and then we have the system operator. Transmission service provider is simply the person that manages the infrastructure. So the person that makes so the transmission service operator, the transmission service provider basically manages the infrastructure, the transmission infrastructure. Whereas the system operator manages the flow of power across this infrastructure. So remember I mentioned earlier that we had 5, based on certain set down rules on the grid code that decide which generating station fits into the grid, when it fits into the grid, how it fits into the grid, and all the other technical parameters that may be required, like frequency and voltage. For the system operator, through its the National Control Center at Osogbo, ensures that there is dispatch of power across from the generating stations to the distribution companies. Now, the market operator in the middle just basically administers the market, so ensures that there's efficient and that the trading of power is efficient and transparent, and administers the market for all the big participants. He's in charge of reading the meters and producing bills in line, and collaboration with MBED use all the good. Also on the administrative lines, CTN has 8 regions, so 8 regions across the country, just for administration. So we have Ishuru, Kaduna, Bauchi, Osogbo, Benin, Enugu, and Port Harcourt. Now the next slide is just depicts pictorially for us things in Nigeria. So it's just to help put a picture to what I have just been speaking about. So you see how the interconnection goes. The blue lines are basically the 330 kilovolt lines I spoke about earlier, and the orange lines are the 162 lines. So they connect the generating stations to the points of utilization. You can see that's what changed in the country today. Now, so in the next slide, I will speak to the statistics of the market and try and see if we can figure out why. So you can see that today, especially saying that power is available, but of course on the news we keep hearing that what is averagely generated. CCN has a wheeling capacity of 8,100 megawatts. So CCN is saying that they can grow this power generation is available, but on the average we keep getting we get an average of 3,500. That's when that is aggregated. However, the peak demand forecast, so what we forecast that the nation is about even 2 times what the stored capacity is about 25,000 megawatts. So you see here that there seems to be a mismatch in the system. There seems to be available power, but the power is not getting the customers. And I believe the next speaker will help put some lines into it, and when the person talk to distribution and what could be the problem. But one of the critical things here is that there needs to be proper interfacing between all the generating stations and the transmission interfaces, so that power can be better evacuated. And then there also needs to be alignment. There basically needs to be alignment between planning, because as you see the numbers, even though the numbers show that power is available, there's a small problem of misalignment. So you have places that may not consume as much power or do not need as much power, having a large amount of installed capacity. So it's like the example that Seyi gave earlier. So you have a room that has 10 flats in a place where you can only get 2 tenants. So you go to your village and you build 10 flats and you can only get 2 tenants. However, you come to the city and you build 2 flats, but you need 100 tenants, or 100 tenants require accommodation. So even though on paper there seems to be availability, but in terms of matching the actual demand and supply where it is physically located, remember that power has to come to you through a physical infrastructure where the demand is physically located. I think if we can figure out a way to, just solve the bottleneck issues, then at least the available power, the available generating capacity that's available today is about 7,000 megawatts, and maybe we'll be able to find its way to the grid and downwards to the customers available for consumption. With these high numbers, electric power consumption per capita is about 1.5 kilowatts. One of the lowest in Africa and indeed the world gas infrastructure that we have. But hopefully and solve especially the interface problems that we have now. Then these things that are already available can be utilized.
The final piece of the puzzle, and that would be the distribution aspect. And that will be presented by Onu Omar-Ikaige, who is a consultant providing services to the distribution companies in Nigeria. Onu, please say hello to our participants while I get your slides.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon and good evening for our participants joining in from outside Nigeria, indeed outside Africa. Good day, everyone. Thank you, Afolabi. I'll say thank you to ETC for organizing this, and a big thank you and friends who have taken us through generation, transmission, indeed the first speaker through the regulatory aspect, and now myself I'll be going giving a brief on the distribution aspect. The distribution part of the NERC, which is in Nigerian electricity supply industry, is a final part before power gets to the user, and this part has to do with distribution of power when received from the transmission infrastructure. Typically for a country like Nigeria, we have transmission infrastructure across geographic locations and across major regions in Nigeria. And we have distribution networks, 11 of them in number, across different regions, because across different states. Particularly, I would keep we have Ikeja Electric and we have Eco Distribution, and both services part of the Lagos mainland and island locals. I'll be speaking directly to the part of distribution. How does that in the value chain? We need to take note that after power has been generated and transmitted, it needs to be stepped down at a particular voltage level because of the high voltage patterns in the country. At transmission level, we have 30 kV as kilovolts, very high, and that cannot be given to consumers, end users, or customers. However, we have customers that would require power at sub-transmission levels, 1 to 2 kV. However, for the distribution part of the network, you have voltage levels that range from 33 kV, 11 kV, down to 0.415 kV, which is used to feed end users. Please, I'll follow the next slide. distribution system network. So, like I said initially, my first slide, just giving an overview. This is the final stage of delivery of power to discos, we like to call them, so companies, and we must all understand that the disco is not a standalone entity. All entities operators, companies, injection companies play a part in that users get just quality of power, but regular power. So it's all a value chain, work hand in hand to enjoy both stability and affordable power. Thank you. Now we have two parts of the distribution network. We have the primary distribution and secondary. Primary talks about power from injection substations down to distribution transformers. Secondary talks about power from distribution transformers down to customers' service wires, customers' load points. Please, next slide. Now, key components of network involves the following, and limited, but not limited to the following. We have the power transformers, which step down power received from transmission down to the distribution voltage level. We have distribution lines that distribute this power to distribution transformers further steps down this received power via the lines to a lower voltage level of, say, between 0.415 and 230 for customers to use. And we have protective equipment. Those are very key. The power that is delivered well protected to avoid damage to end users' appliances equipment. Please, next slide. Now, taking off from the key components, we require switch gears to be able to properly distribute this power, and switch gears are also protective equipment that help the power that is distributed from distribution network. Say, for example, I'm distributing power from Ikaige Electric or Echo down to my end customer. I need to have some switch gears that would help not just provide protection, but to help to also ensure that the power is well distributed. The power is distributed in a format and quality that is required by the end customer. On switch gear is circuit breakers. We have typical AB. Now, one of the characteristics of distribution part of the NERC chain is losses. And on losses, we have majorly what you've seen on the slide, technical losses. And those are losses that are lost in assets and equipment, either in the transformer, energy that you have provided from distribution system against what's received as the customer's end. So that is being compared, and the loss is the difference or the variance within that. We have commercial losses, and that speaks to unbilled energy, energy theft, billing failures, which we get to see in the system, collection losses, unpaid energy value, lost value in Naira, particularly because speaking about in Nigeria. Then ATC&C losses stands for aggregate, technical, commercial, and collection losses. It's a totality of all losses, and this is measured as energy injected versus payment. This slide just speaks more about each of the losses we have, but breaking it down according to its losses technically. So we have billing efficiency, collection efficiency, marketing efficiency, ATC&C loss, T&D loss, transmission and distribution loss. We have customer response rate. Now, the losses to most people may not sound very direct, but just give you an analogy. The losses are a measure of the disco's performance. So if you want to know how a disco is performing, look at our ATC&C losses. We have 11 discos in Nigeria today. You want to know how they're performing, take a look on NERC website, on the disco website, see the ATC&C losses, reduction, post-privatization, and see what has been done so far. And I think most of the companies have been doing their best. Billing efficiency is about the energy bill. So to a large extent, you deliver energy, and you build the energy. So consumers or customers have used energy in a particular month, and this energy is billed, and it has been delivered to the customer endpoint. So you need to know how your billing efficiency is. Efficiency means how much you can collect from the energy that's been billed, or the total revenue billed. Then you have marketing efficiency. It's probably one of the fundamental key areas that people don't pay attention to. At the end of the next slide, please, next slide, there's an activity there share to everybody to help us open our mind to how it's easy, because for us, it's better we bring our to understand how to really see this calculation yourself. You understand that the value from generation company in terms of energy generated, energy transmitted from the company, the energy distributed, vis-a-vis all those timelines, if who is actually putting it best, and you can actually have the performance, or you can do performance analysis by yourself and be very sure of what the value is. On the last note as my ending keynote, there's used to ensure that is very and that is done on very fairly and equitous basis. And this school stands that without having assets to distribute power to customers. So assets are a very, very important requirement. Assets includes transformers, includes distribution lines, includes even down to the metering assets at the customer's premises, and these are all part of key
for and retrieve some of the questions. Okay. So one question is, one of the regulators in the sector is NERC, which oversees activities of the DISCOs. Can I ask Ojosu to answer that question? I don't know if that's a comment or a question. Again, I'm reading it out. It says, one of the regulators in the sector is NERC, which oversees activities of the DISCOs. Can you confirm if that's true or not?
All right. I would say one of the key players is NERC. All right. NERC is actually not a regulator per se, but an enforcement agency that enforces standards. Now, the standards that NERC enforces are set in the NERC's regulation, the Nigerian Electricity Supply and Industry regulations, NERC's regulations that are made by NERC, and the grid code that is also made by NERC. So it is those standards that NERC enforces. All right. But NERC does not make the regulations. NERC makes the regulations. So NERC enforces the safety and the standards in those regulations as made by NERC. So I would say NERC is a key player for that purpose.
Okay. So our next question is from Adeyinka Banjo. Okay, it says, how will the load and demand mix work with the migration to the service reflective pricing / tariffs? Let me read that again. How will the load and demand mix work with the migration to the service reflective pricing tariffs? And I think Ojosu should be able to answer that. Ojosu, will you be able to answer that?
All right. Yes, I will. Currently, what we have under the MITO is a tariff system that is based on cross-subsidy, where the industrial customer subsidizes the residential customer's consumption. All right. So the more industrial customers that you have that are actually pulling a load on the network, the less the price will be on the residential customers. The more residential customers you have that are pulling the
Okay, Ojosu, are you still there? Okay, sounds like we lost Ojosu. Unfortunately, I want to apologize to participants.
Hello?
Yeah, Ojosu, are you still there?
Yes, I am.
We can hear you. So, did you finish that question?
No, I did not.
Okay, go ahead and finish.
All right. So what we have is going to be a situation where the service reflective price is going to be a flat tariff across all customer class. So for instance, if the tariff is going to be 50 naira, you're going to be paying 50 naira across all customers. All right. Thank you, Afolabi.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Ojosu. Let me apologize to our listeners. You have a black screen, and that's because if I put up a screen, I will not be able to attend to your questions. I'm reading your questions, so please accept my apologies. So the next question is to Seyi, and it says, how does gas compare with LPFO in firing plants, cost-wise, and where the plants can be fired by both?
Okay, so interesting that question has come, and we have a power plant in Nigeria, Egbin to be precise, that can be fired on both fuel oil and gas. In reality, for two reasons, fuel oil is usually is kind of more expensive than gas. One of the reasons why it's more expensive is from the sustainability point of view. Fuel oil is relatively dirtier, or quote unquote less green than gas. Then also in terms of managing the logistics of fuel oil also, it can be more expensive. You know, for example, for you to keep running fuel oil through a pipeline, you need to keep heating up the pipeline so that the fuel oil doesn't cake or coagulate, as the case may be. That's not the case for gas. It keeps flowing as long as it's pressured. So on the surface of it, I would say gas is cheaper to run a power plant today than fuel oil. How markets, if oil prices remain as low as it is today, how that plays out, nobody can say for now. It's more or less looking towards life after COVID, as the case may be. So we don't know how the prices of oil will impact, fuel oil prices, and how that can also either drive up the cost of gas or drive down the cost of gas. But historically and on paper, to the best of history, gas is cheaper than fuel oil.
Okay, thank you, Seyi. We have a lot of participants on here from different parts of the world. Let me just mention for those who are in the UK, European setting this up. This is good. We also have a message from Habib. Habib says that by the act establishing NERC, it is both technical, regulatory, and enforcement institution, NERC.
That's like a comment. Okay.
Right, I needed to say that. So we have a question here from Kenya. It says, on legal and regulatory standards, what are the legal protections against political interference with NERC? What's the accountability and complaint management process with NERC? And secondly, if the profit incentive is regulated, how can investors compete successfully in the power sector? Can I ask Ojosu, not Ojosu this time, but Seyi to take a stab at that, and if any of our panelists also has something to say about those questions, because there's a lot in those questions. So if Seyi would just start, and then any of our panelists that has anything to add to the response to that question may do so. So Seyi.
Okay, just so that the answer is not too narrow, let's broaden it. Let's broaden like the understanding of it. Every market is driven by your ability to make profits. However, everywhere in the world, you have consumer protection. Okay. And in light of consumer protection, you would say that the regulator and or the government tries to protect the consumer from profiteering. So in as much as we would want investors to see profit and because of that be attracted to the markets, there has to be some kind of framework that guides cost recovery in terms of your, like what I would call profit or value add for the money you have put into the business. So the question now is in terms of level of interference. What level of interference does is obtainable in the sector, and what level of protection does NERC have? The way NERC is set up, NERC is able to some extent, administer the network, the industry with little interference from the government, the way it is set up. However, there is always going to be the fact that the government is the one that set up NERC, and the government's, I would say, objectives and agendas needs to align, or NERC's administration of the sector needs to align with the agenda of the government. So there is some level of what I would call handshake. Influence might be a way to put it, but it's more like an handshake. But important for me is to say the role of managing profits and or managing pricing is in a sense to protect the customer than to stifle the investor. So it's possible that the investor might not be attracted if the tariff is not cost reflective. Hence what Afolabi had mentioned before in terms of reflectivity and or service reflect. If it doesn't satisfy both the willing seller and the willing buyer, then it's likely that you're going to have a misbalance. Thank you.
Okay, I think that should be enough. Because of our time, we'll only take just two more. One is a comment, and the other one is a question. And the first one is from the UK. Abubakar says, regulatory processes in Nigerian electricity market are not adequately liberalized due to government monopoly. Hence, investment is hindered from the private sector. And then the question finally says, thank you to our wonderful presenters. My question is, why does it seem impossible to have regular power supply to customers? Is there a roadmap to achieving this? And when is the likely year? So I'm gonna ask the lady amongst the panelists, Onyinye, to take a stab at that, and then finally maybe Onu would want to add something to that. So Onyinye, can you take a stab at that, please?
Okay, so thank you very much. It's important to have the pipeline, right? It's not rocket science, but as has been made clear in today's interaction, there are lots of things that speak to that. One which is critical is allowing investment come into the sector. So without adequate investment and without a clear path, so without the financing of how to ensure that the financiers are able to make their money back and with the profit on top, then most financiers will not typically come into the market. The technical and the commercial aspects of running the power business is not rocket science. I mean, it's been done every other place in the world. So for us in Nigeria today, once we can get the financing right, once we're able to show to financiers that there will be regulation that supports both the financier and the customer, and a clear path on how the financier makes his money back, his or her money back, then the sector will unlock, because once financing comes into the sector and investment flowing, available. And there's the vision 30-30-30, and that's 30,000 megawatts in 2030 with 30% renewables. More recently is the cement roadmap. Cement roadmap is set in 3 phases. The Presidential Power Initiative that seeks to unlock 7,000 megawatts in 2021, unlock 11 megawatts in 2025. But this will just remain numbers on paper if the financing that is required to pull in the investment that will open up the sector. As for the technical and the commercial skill set to run this business, they are available in this country in abundance. So it can easily be done once there is the right policy that incentivizes every player in the value chain. So the policy makes sure that every player is protected from the gas, from the man selling gas, or from the man selling the feedstock for power generation to the customer that is buying power. Once everybody is adequately incentivized, and then and this incentive will allow for free flow of finance. And once we have that, power will be available in the country. Thank you.
Okay, Onu.
Yeah, thank you very much, Afolabi. Thank you very much, Onyinye, for that. Onyinye has almost answered everything. I'll just add just one final thing. So the question part I'll be looking at is it possible to have uninterrupted power supply in Nigeria today? The answer to that question, like Onyinye said, just to address it, is yes. Typically, I would use just a few analogies. Sorry to my friends and colleagues on this webinar that are from other parts of Africa or other parts of the world, Canada, and I'm seeing a lot. I see Kenya here too. I see Canada. I see UK and all that. We have within the Ikeja Electric network, we have a few of these in quote quality areas that has been taken as POCs, and they have about 22-24 hours of power supply right now being distributed to them, and they're enjoying that. There's a lot of activity and discussions on Twitter, on Facebook about what is happening both within Ikeja Electric network and ECO. So it's possible to do that. One other thing that I believe would help distribute power 24 hours to our customers is if we fully implement the cost reflective tariff, and we can graduate, like the first speaker said, into service level tariffs that we're looking at, or service reflective tariffs. Secondly, I would say there has to be massive investment. You cannot but see what the discos are doing in terms of metering, in terms of net optimization, in terms of network operates, changing of poles, of lines, of feeders, of even transformers. So there has to be massive investment, not just within one end of the sector, but must be across the supply value chain. So massive investment should continue in the GENCOs, same in the transcos, and the disco. Assets needs to be upgraded. We need to move from where we are to a SCADA reliant system. We have to move from just using analog relays and measuring devices to digital. Metering right now is on advanced infrastructure, one of the best awards so far. So if we can get to our supply to our customers or to esteemed companies, however, there must be huge investment, there must be commitment across the sector, and eventually we'll see the cost of power getting real value at which we should have paid for it in the next coming years. So definitely we can have that. I would just call up a few areas and say states that are close to load centers may enjoy in that the DISCO would be able and willing to partner with different agencies like the REA. We're looking at mini grids. We're looking at isolated or island modes of power being distributed within the DISCO region. We're looking at having renewable energy mix within this population, maybe those people in the interlands or in other areas, and we can give them those power supply they actually desire. We always say electric. We believe in other disclosures that should be going.
Thank you very much. Onu, you spoke, and all of the panelists spoke about so many different topics that we can't even delve into right here. And it's safe to assume that for consumers, all we want is to get reliable. For investors, you guys raised up ideas or insights into the fact for investors who would want to come in and be a player. Very quickly, we had a poll that was taken at the beginning of the session. I don't know if my technical colleague is able to share the result of that poll with us right now. David?
Can you hear me? Can you get me clearly?
Yeah, we can barely. Okay, now we can hear you.
Okay.
Can you share the results of the poll?
So the question was basically the challenges in the Nigerian power sector are due to problems in the options were generation, transmission, distribution, regulation, and others. Right. Of the results, 9 people said the problem is with the generation sector. 17 people said it's with the transmission. 18 said it's with the distribution. 15 said it's with the regulation, and 6 people said it's with the other aspects. Right. So I think at the end of the day, the distribution takes the day.
Okay, and that's understandable because the distribution companies are the ones that are most customer interfacing. And as we can see from all the discussion from our panelists, that it's an entire chain, and problem with one aspect of the chain affects, there's a ripple effect that happens to the entire chain. And the challenge for the power sector is when there's an integration of all of the minds who are the stakeholders in the power sector to bring a solution so that consumers thank all of our panelists for their time. We've learned 1 or 2 things from the discussion, and we thank you for sharing the knowledge that you have. I also want to thank our audience for participating in this webinar. ETC will continue to bring you some other insightful webinars on the energy sector. We've heard so much today, some terms and some ideas that our panelists have come up with. You need to watch out for more information by following our social media handles on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at ETC_Connect. And on LinkedIn, our handle is at ETC-NG. Our web address is www.etc.ng. And finally, I'd like to ask participants, please fill out the feedback forms that you'll be getting through your emails and send back to us. We would love to hear from you, and you'll be seeing more of this webinars shortly. Thank you so much, and goodbye.